All right, guys, it is Monday, June 13th, 2022. So today, I'm getting started out here. I set up a table, I got my little stool out here because lots of people like to complain about me working on the ground. I've worked on the ground all my life. That's just, I've never had workbenches and I've never had a big space. So for me, it's always been working on the ground. So I'm just used to it. What I've got going here, this is one of the original heads off the truck's 305. The other one's soaking. I just turned it over. It soaked all day yesterday. I don't have a whole lot of stuff in there, so it doesn't quite get submerged. So I just flipped it over. It sat all night upside down, and then I just flipped it over to get the grease on the bottom side. So by this evening, that should be ready to pull out and rinse it off, and it should turn out as clean as this one did. So I went through and I cleaned the gasket surfaces up on this, and I just placed one of the new out of the kit gaskets on here, the intake gasket. And surprisingly, the intake's pretty decent. I went ahead and traced it out with a fine tip Sharpie. I don't have machinist die, Dykem, whatever you want to call it. You know, that's what professional guys use. It's that blue looking stuff or purple, then they scribe it. So I use a fine tip Sharpie and I just go in there. Now, I'm not doing this for performance. When I look at the inside of a cylinder head off a small block, some of them's pretty rough inside, and there's sharp edges and stuff that, you know, stuff has to flow through or over, and I just like to smooth it a little bit. I'm not doing a full-blown pork job. What I don't like on these heads is right here. It's probably gonna be hard to see. That is very, very rough right here, like really rough. All these edges are rough, and it's like just the one side, kind of. Well, I guess this one has two, but. So what I'm gonna do is just take a burr bit on the die grinder and go through here and just kind of smooth that up a little bit. And right here, which you'd have to be careful, but, or I'm gonna be, I should say, right here has more of a 45-degree turn. So I'm just gonna slightly radius this edge here and here and here and here. I just felt something really rough in that one. That was a big old chunk of cast right there. So I'm gonna move that off there. So just a mild, you know, little gasket match, I guess you'd say. I'm also gonna check the intake and make sure it's good. Now the other thing I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna touch the combustion chambers. I'm gonna leave them alone. One thing I am gonna do is the oil drains here. You can see the rough cast flash stuck in there. I'm gonna go ahead and clean that out so the oil will flow back a little easier. The main thing for me on cylinder heads, if you have a die grinder, it really doesn't take that long to do this little bitty stuff. Now, obviously, if you're going in and doing a full-blown pork job, you're gonna spend a little bit of time, but I just like to relieve some of the hard edges and stuff that what I would call hot spots. So I'm gonna go through here and just try to clean them up a little bit to where they're, you know, not so rough. What I notice on these center bolt heads, this has a smoother transition on this bottom side going in to the valve than the old school ones. They kind of have a little sharp edge, and I usually radius that. This doesn't need that. So I'm going to check the exhaust gaskets on here and see if these need anything. I mean, you can kind of see how rough the edge is here. So I might at least, you know, chamfer that a little bit. But overall, I'm not doing a mega port job is what I'm trying to tell you. I'll show you something else that's kind of unique to these heads. Kind of similar to the Vortec, I guess, too. But see the ski ramp, they call it right there? That's what they tried to design to help the swirl, I guess, on them. So I'm not going to touch that at all. I'm leaving that alone. But yeah, these really don't need hardly anything compared to an old school head. But I just want to make sure that the you know, there's no hot spots getting created in there. Well, there's a big old chunk of cast stuck there. Look at that. I might knock that down too. Not that it's going to make much difference. So I'm gonna have a little fun, I guess. Do some just a mild little cleanup job on these cylinder heads. So What I got here is a really junky valve spring compressor. I hate this thing. Now when I take valves and rocker arms and all that stuff off of the head, I already have boards made for these, but they have the 305 heads for the 4-door 55. They're already got all the stuff from those heads in there, so I had to make a new one. So I went out back to my wood pile and I got this old beam here and basically drilled some holes so the valves would go in there, and then put some screws in. And the nuts, after I put these in, the nuts wouldn't go over these big headed screws, so I had to use some that I had with smaller heads to put the nuts over here. But what I do is I take, and I've got it marked right here, if you see that black round dot right there, I take the die grinder and I put a little dot in the casting right there, and that's basically front to back. So this will be the front going back. So it's just so I make sure everything goes right back in where it came out of. Surprisingly, this thing smoked when you started it really bad. The little black thin valve seals were pretty much non-existent. There was only a couple of them left and they were hard as a rock. So that could be the problem. The valves actually, the guides are pretty tight on them. They don't have hardly any slack to them. So I'm really happy about that. So I'm glad I decided to go ahead and use these. So should work out pretty good. I'm looking at this right here while I'm talking. Look how gnarly that is, man. I might go ahead and take a Roll-Lock disc 36 and just kind of smooth that off. That's something that could cut me while I'm putting them on the truck or something. So I'm gonna do some port work. And that's way better. Has a nice roll to it instead of a sharp edge to it. Casting flash is bad in that oil drain. times better. Maybe 11. You can see the oil drain back there. Those were really bad. I mean, I didn't go all the way where they could go. I just smoothed it up a little bit so it has a little bit more opening for flow. Another thing I always do to cylinder heads, cast iron ones, when I take them off is the oil drain here. There's one at the top and one in the bottom. I'll take the die grinder and I'll just kind of radius that edge a little bit to chamfer it, whatever you want to call it. Because, you know, this pretty much when it fills full of oil, it runs down through there, so just helps it get in there a little bit better, I think. Not a stitch of performance out of anything I did, I don't think, but well, maybe opening up them exhaust ports a little bit where they're so brick walled right there. It's probably, yeah, I don't know if it's going to get any horsepower, but it's definitely going to help the flow. Alright, you can see how much meat is on that exhaust manifold gasket there. So I'm going to go ahead and chamfer that pretty much to report it to gasket match that as well. Again, it has really rough, like serrated edges right here, which can't be good for hot exhaust gases to slide across, you know what I mean? So I'll check these to the exhaust manifold as well and port match them if I have to, because at the end of the day, cast iron, with a really fresh cone burr, it takes no time. Alright, so now I'm running a thread cleaner down into the bolt holes here. I noticed trying to put my couple of bolts in to hang the exhaust manifold gaskets on that the bolts didn't really want to go down in there very far, full of gunk. This is a flat-ended, this is a thread cleaner, this is not a tap, so this won't cut, it just cleans. Ooh, boy, it sounds gritty. So after I get done with all the mild porting stuff that I'm doing, I'll go back and soak these in degreaser again for at least a couple hours again, and then rinse them off and clean them up, blow dry them real good, and then they'll be ready to assemble. So I've gasket matched this one, and I haven't done these yet, or that one, but my compressor, it's really on its last leg, so I don't want it to sit there and run, especially with 100 degrees out here. I don't want it sitting in there running and running and running and running and then burning itself up. I already did it once. I had to take it apart and kind of rigged it back together. It's been working, but I try not to overwork it. A lot of crap coming out of that hole. I blew all the thread holes out with my compressed air and held the blower like right up in there, and it blew a lot of crap out, but there's more in there. The really crappy part is there's a bolt broke off in the other head, and it's a ways down in there. There's not much hanging out, so, well, there's none hanging out, it's down in it, so I'm gonna have to try to work with that a little bit to get it out of there. I'll probably just end up drilling it and tapping it. I've got an easy out, but it's when they're in there and they're rusted like that, it ain't gonna take it out of there. Man, that was gritty. Well, that one was clear. But you guys get the idea. All right, so here's the end result. So I just pretty much cleaned them up a little bit, port matched them. Again, not going for horsepower, just trying to get rid of hot spots and, you know, gasket match so there's not a lot of disruption on it. But I did more work on the exhaust side than the intake side. I just don't want to take a chance because it's still a stock cam. They have a ski ramp inside of them and I didn't want to mess with that. But the exhaust side is the one that really needed a lot of help. But, I mean, not really. But I did work on both. But so the gaskets match up perfectly now. And I radius some edges and everything and just made it to where it, you know, has a little bit better flow. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now it's time to wash that head real good and then start doing the valve job. I gotta, you know, do some lapping of the valves and get the valves cleaned up, obviously, and then get them put back in there and get them back installed. So I just checked the new exhaust gaskets with the exhaust manifold, and I don't have to do any work. They're the exact match, so they match perfectly. So I'm pretty impressed with that. So neat stuff.